Okay. So as mentioned yesterday, we are going to be practicing analysis today, as well as in the coming days. Oftentimes people get really nervous when I say we're going to analyze artwork. But when analyzing something and not being given any background knowledge or information, you're just formulating thoughts and opinions. So that's all we're doing, is making judgments and thoughts and opinions today. We're going to do a little exercise called See, Think, Wonder. It's on the board. Melanie, I'm going to put yours in the chat, in which I'm going to put up an image of an artwork with no background information whatsoever. You guys are going to write 3 sentences about what you notice in the image, 2 sentences about what you think the content or overall theme that the artist is trying to get across to you might be, and 1 sentence about something that you're still trying to figure out, or a question. So you guys are going to have about 8 minutes to write your sentences. You can write them on a piece of paper, on your computer. I don't care. We're not saving it. This is just practice. Melanie, you're also going to be writing it on a piece of paper or something, a little sheet that you have. And then we will use whatever you guys write afterwards. So let me get that picture up for everyone. Those of you in class, you may possibly have to get up to see the artwork because it's got a lot going on.
Is it in the book?
No, it's not. I am not that nice because that would give you background information. Okay, Melanie, I'm going to type those questions for you. This will go down in a second, guys. Sorry. And Melanie, you're not typing your answers in the chat, you're writing it on paper or your computer or whatever you're doing. I say that because my first hour I typed all of theirs in the chat. You got to really look at that one. There's a lot. You have about 3 minutes left. One more minute. What we're going to do next is work in partners, but I do need one volunteer to be Melanie's partner because I can't be a partner on this one. Thank you, Brandon. Because we will be communicating with each other. Keep your mask on, yes. Yeah, you can just come up here. So what you guys are gonna do is share what you guys wrote for each of those steps, and then talk about some similarities or differences between what you wrote. We're gonna have one group of 3 and one group of 2 out in the audience. Any questions on how to do that? Just tell everyone what you wrote. Melanie, your partner is Brandon right here. He can hear you, you can hear him.
Okay. So do you go first, Brandon, or me?
I mean, so it was like, write 3 sentences of what what you have
What you
saw.
see?
Yeah, on the, so, I mean, you can go first.
Okay, so what I wrote is like, I see bugs, like some sort of cockroach. That's what I wrote. And then I also see a bunch of colors like red, blue. I can't really distinct it here from the camera, but
Yeah, it's like a mixture of red, blue, and like a pink, and it looks like as if they implied some orange into it also,
uh-huh.
and then they use those colors to mix together for different shadings. Um, so that's what I put is the background. It looks like a canvas type texture.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like like that canvas wasn't stretched, so it was gonna be uh this is before they even would do canvas. It looks like it's aged back, in
I know what you
prior
mean.
history. So they would have had to lay it out to paint it. So it is symmetrical, but I don't. It looks like it's vertically and horizontally, um, like symmetrical in ways. Like they at least aligned it out before just kind of going on about painting it. And the birds, I don't.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I saw birds.
Yeah, so there's plenty of birds. What, you know, I don't know what that was trying to illustrate. Because I mean, it could be life within itself, like nature.
Mm-hmm.
But it like you could even interpret the whole painting as like I put as the heart flutters and stays steady. So the continuation of how life works. I mean, because you have to eat to survive. There's bugs in the painting, so and it doesn't branch out. It's kind of like it's there.
And also, do you see like the numbers?
Yeah, yeah.
I just wonder what like that's for the what like the
Wondering.
question. I
Yeah,
wonder
yeah.
what it's for. I don't understand. Like that's what I'm wondering.
It may be that um yeah, I don't know. It may be that I mean you could say, I mean maybe it symbolizes the artist, his own, names or people in his life. Like abbreviations in a way. So
Yeah,
that's,
it could be.
that's kind of like what I put. I was like, I just want to know the meaning.
um, the two sentences. Maybe that's the message. That might be the message. I
Yeah.
honestly don't know what the message could be. You said like survival, right?
Well, no, I said, well, my own interpretation would be like, as the heart flutters and stays steady. So, like, just the rotation of, using birds to illustrate life. And from the beginning on the bottom left corner, from going in, it looks like as the bird flies up, it goes back down,
Mm-hmm.
and then goes back up and back down and back. It's like just the repeat of as the everyday life. I mean, that's what I think.
Okay.
I can be
let's
completely
stop
wrong.
there. A bunch of you guys are on the right track, so that's good. This is very complex. There's a lot going on. Even though it's just a drawing, which most of you have surmised it is a drawing, there's definitely more than just a drawing happening here. What's some of the things that you guys got when you were just describing what you saw? What are some commonalities that you guys had?
The colors.
Colors. So what are the colors? Blue and red. There's only two. And I noticed someone was asking how they drew it. Any guesses as to what the medium actually is? No. Colored pencil and paper. So we have a red and a blue colored pencil and a piece of paper to make this particular artwork. What's something else that you guys noticed when you were looking at it?
The lines.
What do you mean,
Like
these lines? The divisions. Yeah. Any guesses as to what those divisions might be?
Page.
You are definitely on the right track. We'll talk more about that in a second. You're definitely on the right track. What's something else that you guys noticed looking at it? We have lines and colors. The little creatures, yeah.
But he,
That is a clock.
uh,
There's a clock here, and there's a clock
because
here.
every box has something.
Yes, every box has something in it.
Yep. That makes-
Every single box has something.
Oh,
Okay. Anything else that you guys noticed? No. Okay. That's the main thing. Colors, clock, creatures, lines that divide everyone into little blocks. Good. So, what do you guys think might be the overall theme or content message that the artist is trying to convey? You don't have much to go on, so
I have chaos, and it looks
chaos,
kind of looks like a dream to me.
kind of. That's a good thing to mention.
I thought of Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah. What'd you get?
if I were to just interpret it, knowing that it's a clock kind of makes sense because I didn't know that. But as the heart flutters and stays steady, so like going around, it just
Yeah.
keeps going and continuation. And you
Yeah.
use the birds to illustrate life and the
So.
bugs to feed it.
Before we get too much further, now I'm going to give you the context. I mentioned Cage is definitely on the right track, as well as a dream is kind of sort of on the right route, and you guys noticed the creatures. So the fact that all of these little creatures are cordoned off references a cell or a cage, so very good. This was made by the artist Frank Jones. Frank Jones was an inmate in a prison in Texas. He served a life sentence, so he ended up dying in prison. And he drew these pictures in prison. The reason why it's red and blue, last period thought it was like USA. But it's actually because those are the only colors he had access to. They use red and blue to balance their checking accounts and statements in the prisons back in the 90s. So they would give him extra pencils that they had as well as any extra paper. So these are literally the only colors he had. That's the reason why. So it's not USA, but it's just what he had. Later on, inmates, well, that particular inmate, he was given other colored pencils like green and purple. So his later works will have more color usage than this one. So yeah, these are individual jail cells. He himself was in jail. Knowing that these are cells, what do you think that clock has to represent? Time passing. So sentences as well as literal time passing while in those cells. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. And here's where you're kind of on the right path with the dream. Frank Jones was a little kooky. He thought he could see demons. And he thought it was his job, given to him by God, since he could see them and no one else could, to capture the demons. So this image here is not just an artwork, but for him it serves the purpose of he's literally capturing the demons. He felt like if he drew the demons and put them in little cells, that they wouldn't be able to escape and torment people. And of course, he felt that all of the prisoners in the jail were haunted by some sort of a mischievous demon. So he was going about trying to save them. Interesting fellow, a bit dreamlike.
What was he in jail for?
I don't remember. I don't think it was anything. Well, I think he murdered someone.
I was gonna say probably fighting his own demons.
But because he did end up with life in prison, he was also really crazy. He had a particular disorder which made him see black spots all the time, which was the way he thought the demons were. So every single one of these creatures, you notice they have horns on them. There's a reason why. They look like insects to me at first glance. Yeah.
Yeah, they look like they're smiling. I thought they were happy.
That's because demons are mischievous. They're up to no good. So they are smiling actually. But yeah, they're all horned little demons, and every single one of them is different because they don't look the same to him. And he felt like he needed to draw those cells around them, and if he left any openings, they'd be able to get out and get free. Of course, these are not captured yet. He ran out of paper space, I guess. Yeah, all of his drawings look identical. Some of them are different colors because they gave him different color pencils later on. He is an outsider artist, so not trained. He ended up starting to sell his artworks while he was in jail. They're now considered collectible items today by galleries, and they're worth quite a bit of money. Yeah. Yeah. Last question. Was there something else that you were wondering about this image? Looks very simple and childlike.
The numbers?
The numbers are the clock.
Okay, so the.
Yeah. The numbers are here and here. They represent the clock. Yeah. Obviously a lot more to it than just a childlike quality of drawing. Tomorrow we're going to practice the same method again. Obviously for real analysis, you'd write a lot more than just 5 sentences or 6 sentences. You'd do a lot more of an in-depth study, and you'd probably research as well to try and get some background knowledge. But this just shows you that even without any knowledge whatsoever, most of you were on the right track on trying to figure out what was happening in this image. My first hour, actually, one student got it. He was like, it looks like Gale. And then his partner, who he teamed up with, thought the creatures were demons. And I'm like, that's the closest anyone's ever gotten before. Good job. And the two of them together, by combining their brains, figured it out. Tomorrow's image is not going to be abstract or contemporary. Tomorrow I'm going to be pulling something from the Baroque period, which uses iconography. So be prepared for that one. It is also not in your book. So, yeah. Any questions on analysis? We're actually going to be analyzing some photographs today as well. And we are doing photography today. The medium photography is a bit different from the others that we've talked about so far because there's really only 2 kinds. There's black and white and color. So instead of going through the different kinds and how they're different, instead we're going to be focusing more on the history of the invention of that particular medium and follow it throughout time. Starting with, of course, its origins. The earliest form of a camera is not the kind of camera that we think of today that takes a permanent image. It is actually the camera obscura. The camera obscura is a box with a teeny tiny little pinhole in it and a mirror that helped artists in the Renaissance period check to make sure their linear perspective was correct. It did not take a lasting image at all, but it's our first example of a camera. Of course, today's cameras do take images that are permanent. Yeah. There's still some people that believe that kind of stuff too, and that mirrors hold souls and things like that. So, yeah, we aren't talking about that today. We're just focusing on the history. The earliest real camera that actually took a lasting image were invented by 2 people that were competing to try and finish it first, Joseph Niepce and Louis Daguerre. Niepce was working on his heliography and Daguerre working on his daguerreotype. They were working in the same exact city in France, several blocks away from each other. Like I said, they were trying to finish it first. Niepce's heliography uses paper and chemical reactions on that paper to adhere the image to it. So we're talking about light sensitive chemicals. And depending on where shadows and light are, the image will be darker or lighter on that particular area of the paper. Does paper have a grain and texture? Yes or no? Yes, paper has texture to it. It's made of pulp. So it is going to have a texture. Louis Daguerre, working same time, same city, used the same method, but instead he used a metal plate. Does metal have a texture? Plain metal plate, steel metal plate. Is it going to have a texture? Everything kind of has texture, but what kind of texture does a smooth metal plate have? Smooth. We have pulpy paper and a smooth piece of metal. Which one is going to be the blurrier image? Why do you say this, smooth?
Because of it's going on the metal. I mean, it has it's like this is, you can't really see it. I mean, well.
Okay, why
I
do you
guess,
say the paper, Sam? Okay, so let's see who's right. Here is Niepce view out of his window. Early photography exposure time was about 8 hours, so they didn't take pictures of people. They took pictures of stuff. I don't know many people that want to sit there for 8 hours. So here we have the Niepce heliography on paper versus Daguerre's. Which one is clearer and which one is fuzzier? First one is a lot fuzzier. It's because the fibers of the paper ended up messing with the photograph itself. And this one is obviously a lot clearer. Today we don't take pictures on metal plates though. We use photography paper.
We can still have them printed on.
You can still have them printed on metal, yeah. But we use something else. Photography paper, obviously not textured, extremely smooth. So you can kind of see which of these was probably more popular. Any guesses? Daguerre's and his daguerreotype that he named after himself. One of the reasons why it was more popular, obviously, it's clearer. Second of all, he had his patented, and once it was patented, the information of the technology was released to the public. Niepce really never published any of his stuff, so people didn't know what he was doing. And then thirdly, Daguerre was best friends with a lot of other inventors that helped to spread the news, such as Samuel B. Morse. Does anyone know what Samuel B. Morse invented? It's in the name.
Morrison's.
Samuel B. Morse. Morse code, yes. We're talking about guys that are vain enough to name their inventions after themselves. So yeah, Samuel B. Morse was best friends with Louis Daguerre. Samuel B. Morse from the United States. He brought daguerreotypes back with him after visiting France to the US, and that happened in other areas as well. People were friends with Daguerre and he gave them the technology on how to make these photographs. And they took it back with them to their respective homes, helping to spread the popularity of the daguerreotype. As stated, daguerreotypes have very, very long exposure time, several hours. Here's another daguerreotype. This one was done in 1839, the same year that the patent was purchased by the French. So the country of France purchased the patent. They purchased the rights to the invention. This is the Temple Boulevard in his hometown. It's actually a very busy street, but because of the long exposure time, if something's not sedentary for a while, it's not going to actually show up. So all of the horses and carriages that drove along the street and the people walking would not show up unless they stood in the same spot for a really long time. But we have an instance in which that very thing occurred right down here. Right down in the bottom left-hand corner, we have the very first photograph of a human being. A man at a shoe shine station. Meaning he stood at that shoe shine station without moving for over an hour. No one knows who he is. Everyone always asks me who this guy is. And I'm like, well, it took several hours for this to be caught. And then, of course, you had to develop the film, which takes a few hours as well. Probably this guy was long gone by then. Yes.
Imagine becoming part of history and not even knowing it because you're doing your job.
I know, yeah. What were you going to say?
How do they, so it's exposure time, but then like the light changes, and how do they?
So, we're actually going to talk about artists that played with lights and darks in a moment. But what happens is it's going to capture it at its brightest because the brighter chemicals are going to react first. So once the sun starts to like go away, it's not going to catch that. It's not going to alter it at all. It's the light reaction with the light sensitive chemicals that makes it pop up.
And it can pop up only if it's still. So
Yeah.
captured.
Yeah. So that's why we only have like trees and buildings and then this random dude. Good question. No one's ever asked me that before. But yeah. Okay. So shortly after the invention of photography, it began being used by artists. However, originally most artists felt threatened by the invention of photography. They were worried it was going to take their jobs away from them. Most artists at this point in history were making money off of landscapes and portraits and still lifes and champloi paintings. So trying to make things look as realistic as possible. Photography does that with a lot less time. So artists were freaked out thinking that photography was going to steal all of their revenue. However, there were a few artists that adopted photography as a new way of making art. Such artists were Julia Margaret Cameron and Alfred Stieglitz. Julia Margaret Cameron is one of the first artists that tried to play with exposure times and lights and darks. If you remember our photograph of Abraham Lincoln from a couple weeks ago, depending on the time of day, you can get really, really strong shadows or bright color, bright shades of white. Julia Margaret Cameron played with the exposure and shadows in order to create really dramatic looking photographs. So instead of photographing things in bright daylight, she would photograph things in dark rooms with like a spotlight on one side, creating images like this. So here it looks like there's like a window and then of course the shadow on the other side. She did this with a bright spotlight, same with this one, to get that light and dark, bold chiaroscuro effect in the photography. There's also images that she did of women in fancy ball gowns and children that she would shorten the exposure time, meaning that she would have them leave while it was still being etched onto the surface of the photography paper, which creates a transparent effect on the people. So if they don't sit for the full exposure time, they're going to look like ghosts. So she did that, which was pretty cool. Definitely playing around with that new technology, trying different things to see what's going to happen. So a lot of experimenting was going on when this particular technology was released. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why early photography, nobody smiles. Because we're talking like sitting there for 45 minutes to an hour. You don't want to do this. So that's why most people have a very stoic expression on their faces because they know they're going to be sitting there for a while. Eventually, things like flash photography are invented, which definitely cuts down on that exposure time. In fact, that 8-hour exposure time gets cut down very quickly to just an hour, and then eventually 30 minutes, and then eventually a minute, and then eventually just a few seconds. Of course, today it's instant. So definitely grand improvements from that 1839 just to this one's done in the 40s or 50s. It was when Julia Margaret Cameron was working, so not that long. So grand improvements there. Any other questions? Another artist that was pioneering in photography was Alfred Stieglitz. He's one of the main reasons why photography is considered an art medium. If you've not caught on so far, the art world is a bit stuffy and disclusive. I mean, we still don't consider crafts to be art. So it takes a lot of effort on the part of people to try and get something new to be accepted in the art world. Alfred Stieglitz was one of those main pioneers to get photography accepted. He did so in a few different ways. First off, he had his own magazine that he published called Camera Works, in which he would feature photography being used as an art form. He also featured some other contemporary artists. He had his own gallery in New York where he showed photography being used artistically. He also, of course, had really, really large art shows as well. We're going to be talking about something called the Armory Show later on this semester, which garnered a few 100,000 people's attention. So it's different things like that, getting the information out to people that helps get photography accepted in the art world. And of course, other artists also pick up using that medium thanks to the spread of that information, of people learning that you can actually use this artistically, not just to take pictures of people. Here is his most famous photograph, Steerage from 1907. This photograph is not something that he just took one and done. Of course, all photography, you take many, many shots and you wait for the perfect moment. You'll analyze that setting over and over again to decide what's going to work and what's not. But this is a photograph showcasing immigration happening in the United States in the early 1900s. It also shows the social class differences that were happening. Yeah, so steerage is where the animals, the luggage, things like that would have been kept when coming across the Atlantic Ocean on these ships. You wouldn't want to be in steerage. That's, like I said, literally where they keep the barn animals. So horses that are being transported back and forth for purchase, things like that. So any guesses as to what's going on in this top or who's in the top part? First class, yes. And then of course down below are the people that got stuck in steerage. You can tell they're having to do their own laundry, make their own food. These people in first class would have someone doing it for them. They wouldn't be doing it themselves, which is why they are not doing it. They're just enjoying the scenery of approaching Ellis Island, and these guys are busy working. They don't even get to really appreciate coming to America because they're busy. And Alfred Stieglitz was able to really signify those differences by using the actual ship and the lines of the ship to divide the two. So we have the metal hull of the ship as well as the ramp, helping to divide those two classes there and separate them. Like I said, this is not like a one and done thing. He probably watched many different ships coming in to come up with the idea or be inspired for the idea. And then of course, waiting for the perfect moment to capture it and really showcase those differences, and really helping to launch photography into an art medium, not just, once again, taking photographs of random people that are wanting their photographs taken. Another artist that was early on in working with photography is Henry Cartier-Bresson. Here's one of his photographs. Henry Cartier-Bresson liked to do a little bit of a different thing with his photographs. By this point in time, exposure time had been cut down to just a few seconds thanks to flash photography. We're going to talk about another artist in a second that used flash photography. But at this point in history with photography, people didn't realize that you could fake photographs. Today we know you can alter and fake photographs with Photoshop and filters. Back then they thought that photographs are something that you can't lie with. It is what it is. You see what you see. Henry Cartier-Bresson liked to create really interesting compositions and take well-timed photos to make it look like he can do impossible things. For example, people believed when looking at this one that he was walking on water. Obviously not, he just well-timed it. It rained the night before and he was just jumping around in puddles. He has another one that looks like he's flying, but all he was actually doing was keeping his arms outstretched as he fell out of the one-story window onto a mattress. But the person underneath him was taking a photograph, so all you could see was his arms outstretched and the sky behind him. People really thought he was flying. Strange things happening at this point in time with photography. As mentioned, photography made its way to the United States in the 1830s, thanks to Samuel B. Morse. And photography was used during the Civil War to capture the battle's aftermath. Particularly a group of artists known as the Greensboro Boys were going around and taking those photos. People didn't realize that those guys were creating compositions that looked more interesting to the people purchasing the photos. They thought they were really going in and just taking pictures of what they saw. What those guys were actually doing was dragging dead bodies of people and piling them up to make them look like massive piles, and using directional force lines to lead your eye up the piles to try and entice viewers, because they were trying to make a buck off of their photos. People didn't know that. People thought that's what it really looked like, that there were really just piles of dead bodies after the battles. So yeah, things like that were happening with photography, and no one really realized it until afterwards. With the Greensboro Boys, no one knew it until someone read their notebook years later. And they made a lot of money. They sold their photos to the newspapers, and they also had booklets of their photographs that you could purchase and have the whole collection. They became quite wealthy off of staging aftermath of battles, taking pictures of them. Another way photography was used in the early 1900s, other than trying to create interesting compositions and trick people into thinking that's what things actually look like, was for social change. Particularly, it was used by muckrakers. Does anyone know what a muckraker or muckracker is? They were working in the 1920s in the United States. The most famous novel written by a muckraker was The Jungle, which was all about the Chicago meatpacking industry and the corners they were cutting on sanitation there. They were like rat droppings mixed in with the meat and poisons and everything being left out. Very disgusting. Yes. Muckrakers are reporters that go around and try and bring attention to specific subjects. Today we use the term whistleblower. Muckraker is specifically used for those doing it in the 20s. Jacob Riis is a muckraker, but instead of writing stories, he published photography and put on photography shows. The things he was interested in bringing awareness to were the social issues, such as tenement housing. Tenement housing was disgusting. You would have 30 people living in one room with no windows, no air conditioning, no heater, no toilet. So if one person gets sick, everyone's going to get sick. A lot of people were dying. That's where most immigrants started off at, was in a tenement house. So he brought attention to those issues, which changed rules for apartment living, such as they were required to have windows for escapes in case of a fire, as well as the little railing to get down out of your apartment. They were also required to have toilets inside of the apartment, as well as other things after bringing awareness to that. He also brought awareness to child labor. So at this point in U.S. history, children oftentimes ended up working in factories in very dangerous conditions. Factories were a place you could easily lose a limb or a finger or two. You didn't get to sit down at your factory job, and you're working 18 plus hours a day for a few cents. So things like minimum wage, work hours, age laws were put into place because of people like him. He also got children recess because schools didn't have playgrounds or recess until after him. So yeah, kind of an important guy. And we're actually going to watch a short video on how he used the newer technology of a flash in order to capture the images and present them to the wealthy in this particular version of the US, which had no freaking clue what was going on. This is known as the Gilded Age, as well as other things like the melting pot era. And during the Gilded Age, the US was doing very well off, so the wealthy people thought everyone was doing great, but they weren't. There were many people that were not doing good at all.
In many cities, slums are growing uncontrollably. Multiple families crammed into one small tenement room. Human waste pours into the streets, alleys, and open courtyards.
People were crowded in. There were windowless tenements. Sometimes you had no internal plumbing, just privies in the basement, in the backyard. And the Lower East Side during these years was the single most crowded place in the entire world.
Jacob Riis, Danish immigrant, crime reporter, photographer. He gets leads, the stories from Chief Inspector Burns. Now he's about to expose the hell of tenements. Jacob Riis knows what it's like to be poor. 15 years ago, he lost his job in a stock market crash. It's midnight, but Riis has a new technology that can change the public perception of poverty. An explosive powder that produces enough light to photograph in the dark. This is one of the first ever photographs of slum life. It shocks millions.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jacob A. Riis, and this is how the other half lived and died in New York City.
Magazines refuse to print his work, so Riis puts on his own magic lantern shows. His mission, to show America's wealthy something they've never seen before. Filth and desperation on their doorstep.
In this block, 9 dead were carried out this year alone. 5 baby coffins.
What he demonstrated was that there is another reality, that all that prosperity didn't trickle down all the way to the bottom, and there was some deplorable living conditions, and this country was not just forced to confront those conditions, but then was moved to begin to deal with them.
Riis publishes his pictures in a book called How the Other Half Lives. It will sell more than 28 million copies worldwide. Within 2 decades, the worst of the New York slums are torn down. tenements sell at auction for as little as $1. Reese's campaigning forces all New York schools to build playgrounds and landlords to install toilets inside apartments, not outside. It is the first step in tackling the slums.
Who's that?
So, fairly important person in not just photography's history, but also U.S. history. And of course, one of the early examples of how photography can be used to bring awareness to issues and problems that are happening. Other artists also latch on to that idea of the power of photography, because once again, at this point in time, people don't realize you can fake photography. So there's understanding this is what it actually looks like. So this is what the inside of a tenement house actually looks like. People piled on top of each other. No room for any of their things. This is a huge fire hazard, by the way. So there's a stove with stuff stacked on top of it like wood. And this is a coal burning stove at that time. And of course, not usually any windows. So if this did catch fire,
Yeah.
sucks. So bringing awareness to those issues to help inspire change. Here's another Jacob Riis, this one, of course, focusing more on child labor issues. These are two young girls working in a textile factory. And another example of an artist that's using photography to bring awareness to people, Dorothea Lange and her Dust Bowl series. So Dorothea Lange was part of something called the Works Progress Administration. That's a particular government branch of jobs that was created during the Great Depression. So if you're not aware, during the Great Depression, people needed jobs, so the government started making random jobs. One such thing was the Works Progress Administration, which paid artists to go make artworks that helped to represent America. Dorothea Lange worked under that, and she took photographs of what America looked like in the Dust Bowl region and what was happening with those people. Those artworks were published in newspapers and books later on. It's probably one of the most well-known photographs in history, The Migrant Mother. And once again, it's all about illustrating what life was like during the Dust Bowl. Now let's see if you guys know what the Dust Bowl is.
Wasn't that like, it was previous to the Great Depression, right?
It started before and it was really bad during, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So
Wasn't it actually like a really bad dust storm?
Yeah. So it began with a drought. And then these, you know how we have those Saharan dust storms that come through here? It was a really, really bad one of those.
yeah.
On top of a drought. So things are already dry and dusty, and then you get a whole bad Saharan dust storm blowing, and it lasts for months. That dust just blowing in. So things are piled up and coated with dust. But before that even happened, there was an issue of a lack of crop rotation. You guys know what crop rotating is?
Yeah.
Good.
About soil.
Yeah. So if you don't change what you're planting, and you just plant the same thing over and over again, it's going to suck up all the nutrients that you need. So let's say you're going to plant corn. You keep planting corn over and over again. The nutrient needed to grow corn is eventually going to run out. So you rotate what you're planting so that different nutrients are being used so that it's not completely being depleted. Today we know how to do that. Back then we were not quite so educated on it. It's one of the reasons why Ireland couldn't grow potatoes for a really long time, and there was that potato famine. Also the same era. But yeah, so they weren't rotating their crops. Then there was a long drought, and then the dust on top of it. People couldn't grow food, and we're talking about the middle section of America, which is where most of the food is grown. And of course, add the Great Depression on top of it. Everyone's starving. There's no food for anyone. Food's extremely expensive if you can get it. And people don't have jobs. So these people that are from these farms that can no longer produce any food have to abandon their homes and try to go somewhere else to try and get a job so they don't starve, because these people were literally starving to death. People died of starvation during this time. And so here we see a photograph of a mother and her children as they're in the middle of a caravan working their way to California. California was one of the few areas in the United States that had jobs available, particularly picking fruit. Citrus fruit picking was quite an easy job to do. It didn't pay much, but it was a job, and you could get money to potentially buy food. So a lot of migrants ended up making their way there. And here we have the photograph of a woman and family on their way. She did other photographs of that series. This is just the most prominent photograph because of the composition and how emotionally connected you feel to the woman in the photograph. A lot of people, because she's so close to the camera, her other photographs are like at a distance. This one's a close-up, and you can see on the face, and people can connect with what a mother might be feeling or thinking, having to go through something like this with her young children. So it kind of pulled on the heartstrings of Americans. Like I said, this was published in newspapers. This is a point in history in which people could not just go online and figure out what was happening in the rest of the world. They had to read about it and learn about it through things like books and newspapers. So the rest of the United States was being educated on what life was like in the middle portion of the US. So it was kind of cut off from places like New York. So once again, bringing social awareness using photography. Another member of the Works Progress Administration, but not quite as depressing as far as photographs. Ansel Adams was another artist that was being paid by the government to go and take pictures that helped to represent America. He instead went to national parks and took pictures of the parks, because national parks are a great way to illustrate America, because not many countries have those kinds of landscapes available to them. The United States is a very rare occurrence of that. So what he would do is single-handedly carry all of his photography and development equipment to him in a small truck bed, and he'd drive to all these national parks, hike and camp out in them for a few days to study the landscape, where he wants to take his photograph at, what time of day he wants to take his photograph, and what scene he's trying to set up as far as the overall image that he's wanting to portray of that particular park. Really gorgeous landscape photography that we get from Ansel Adams. All of it's black and white. This is at a point in history in which we do have color photography. We're going to talk about why artists were not using it in a moment, but chose to do black and white photography, very dramatic, grand looking, serene as well. And here we see a photograph of Yosemite National Park as a winter storm is passing through. So the storm you can see exiting in the background. Beautiful, beautiful landscape photography. I have a ton of books on Ansel Adams because the last dude that was in my classroom was a huge fan. I have like 20 books on Ansel Adams. He's a good photographer, but 20 books on one person is a lot. So, like I said, color photography had been around. It's been around since 1907, but nobody used it in the beginning. Number one, because originally it was really bad. It was not very good color photography. You had to go in and put the colors back into the photograph by hand, and it just didn't look nice. Eventually, color photography advanced quite a bit, but a lot of artists did not want to use color photography because they didn't feel it would be quite as dramatic or clean looking or pristine. They felt it would be a bit garish. But in the 70s, thanks to the artist William Eggleston, color photography became widely accepted and popular. Eggleston helped to encourage other artists to use color photography by capturing really bright, vivid colors and knowing his color wheel. So he would capture things like red and green, which are, of course, complementary colors, and red and yellow, which are, of course, analogous. He always captured the color red. It's his favorite color. It's also extremely bright and vivid as far as the color wheel is very warm. So a great way to showcase how you can use color photography to get really interesting, bright images and eye-catching images. So to do his photographs, he took pictures of everyday objects as in like this, everyday objects. This is obviously a diner setting with a tablecloth, a little candle, some Tabasco sauce, fries, and some sugar, pepper, salt, all that. So here we see bright red against yellow, analogous colors, red and green, complementary colors. So the dude knew his color wheel. He also knew that red was a very eye-catching color. Red and yellow, of course, the brightest, warmest colors on the color wheel. So he predominantly gravitated towards those when trying to pioneer the acceptance of color photography. For people that weren't done writing, sorry. I jumped the gun a little bit on that one. On the plus side, this is the last thing you gotta write. Unless you want to write something else.
It looks like the checkerboard.
Yeah, it looks like the Orozco checkerboard that we looked at a long time ago. It's just a checkered tablecloth. Yeah. Yeah. Super simple. It's the same exact color scheme as Orozco's as well. It's because those colors go really well together. That's pretty much what Eggleston did. He just worked with colors that went really well together, and people liked it.
It wasn't until 1976
that color photography was accepted. Like they'd used color photography before, but artists didn't like it. They preferred black and white. And artists today, some still prefer black and white because it just looks dramatic and classic. But there are other artists that now prefer color, thanks to Eggleston trying to push for it. I like black and white photography. I think it's clean and nice. But then there's also some positives to color as well. We'll talk about a color photographer that's really prominent today, probably the most famous photographer today. I like his color photographs. I don't like many color photographs. I'm realizing that as I'm thinking back, I'm like, I don't like them. I prefer black and white. Yeah, it just looks clean.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes with everything and when you're like decorating.
Yeah.
So yeah, here's another William Eggleston. This is probably his most famous one. This is Greenwood, Mississippi. I gotta scroll down a little bit for the people in the room to see the whole thing. This was taken in a hotel room in Greenwood, Mississippi. For this one, once again, the color red was used, but not so much because it was complementary or analogous, but because of what the color red means. What are some of the meanings of red? Means psychologically feelings. Anger.
Anguish. Yeah.
There's a better one. Has to do with the image. A little Easter egg that's in the image. What is the Valentine's Day color?
Oh.
So love and passion. There's a reason why Valentine's Day is red and not purple. So love and passion, red usually represents those things. Sometimes it can be anger, but anger is also considered a form of passion to most people. But in this image, there's a little Easter egg as well. So this is not a normal hotel. Matthew sees it. I can tell in his eyes. He sees it. His eye all of a sudden.
I was really looking for it after you said it.
Yeah. So this is a romance hotel. Of course, when you're first looking at the image, you're drawn to the bright red ceiling, and then eventually you make your way down to the hidden part that Eggleston has added in. One of the reasons why this is his most well-known photograph is because he was a little bit cheeky in his composition, allowing the viewer to take in the red room first and then understanding why it's red. So it's a little bit of a fun one. I once had a student that thought this was in the shape of a heart. I think that's reading a little bit too much into it, but hey, you can if you want to. It just looks like a really sad motel room to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Here's another Eggleston, once again, focusing on color usage and the color wheel. We have a photography hut. Kodak Photography is actually the first company to make color photography. So I think it's kind of cute that he has a little Kodak studio here, since they're the first ones to do color, and he's trying to pioneer the usage of color. A little nod to them. And of course, there's a reason why McDonald's is yellow and red, because those colors are analogous.
Where I'm from, they have a town, and the McDonald's family is perfect because they said it was going to offset the mountains.
Yeah. I've never known anyone that's been able to like overrule McDonald's colors, so that's cool. That's awesome though. But yeah, turquoise would be pretty.
Yeah.
I don't like the color red. So.
It's the only one.
That's awesome. Huh. And another artist that is a bit more contemporary, that uses photography, Cindy Sherman. She will do color and black and white, just depending on what she's working with and what she's trying to do. So she's not stuck in one setting. She goes back and forth. But she likes to, she's going to come up again later on too, by the way, but she likes to play on tropes of females and how females are portrayed in society. So if you guys are on TikTok, this is like the easiest way I can convey this in today's terms. If you're on TikTok, you know there's like e-girls and dark academia and all those different trends that girls are well, not just girls, but girls and boys are just popped into. She was playing on that idea. So different examples of females that popped up in specifically Hollywood movies, how women are portrayed in these films. So like your classic runaway girl from the early 70s and 80s films, your classic teenager who's love struck, your girl that's wanting to be a thin, beautiful model. She plays on those ideas and how women are portrayed, and she takes self-portrait photographs. So this is actually Cindy Sherman herself. She sets up the camera, sets it on a timer, and then she does different poses throughout and then picks the one that she likes the best. So she's not having someone else take pictures of her. She's doing it all by herself in her home or studio. She started off in her home and now she has a studio. Early pioneer of feminist art. Obviously, if she's trying to showcase different tropes of females portrayed in society. And here we have the example of the love-struck young woman. Her eyes are even cross-eyed there, trying to showcase how stupid it is to think that women are just like that. And yeah. Now here we have that artist that I mentioned earlier, who's the most famous photographer in the world. He's from Canada. We don't get to talk about any other artists from Canada in this class because there's not many. Jeff Wall. Jeff Wall is that rare example of a color photographer that I actually enjoy, but it's because of the way he does his color photography. It's different from anyone else that's come before him or after. He prints his photographs on plexiglass and then displays the photographs in front of fluorescent light boxes. So what that does with the photograph is it makes it extremely bright. It basically makes it a nightlight. These photographs are large, so about half the size of the whiteboard is how big this would be. Huge for a photograph. They aren't usually that big. And he does really quirky, interesting compositions. This is just an early example. In the 90s, which is where this one's from, there were some issues with racial tensions in Canada between Asian immigrants and white Canadians. So here we have that illustrated in an image. Here is the white man flipping off the Filipino. Yeah, it's not a phone. Everyone always thinks that, but phones in the 90s were about this big, so you'd know. So he's just flipping him off and he's eyeing him, and of course his girlfriend's on the other side, acting like he needs to protect her from this poor Filipino guy who, like, he looks more presentable than the other dude in my brain. But hey, whatever. He looks safer to be around than he does. But hey. Sometimes there's not much meaning behind his photographs. So this is another Jeff Wall. He just copied a Japanese ukiyo-e print and made it contemporary. Sometimes he actually takes on big social issues like this one here. And for this one, we're going to do a little bit of an analysis. What's something you guys notice? Looks there's a lot. It's messy. And there's a lot of stuff in there, right? There are a bunch of light bulbs. Yeah. Are all of the light bulbs on? No. Is this dude alone or with people? What's the overall tone? Sad and lonely, correct? It's not like I wouldn't want to be in there. It doesn't look like a place I want to be. So here we have a mess of an apartment. Dishes have piled up, trash is on the floor, the clothes are not cleaned. Some of the lights are on, some of them are off. What do light bulbs being on in cartoons usually signify? An idea. So we have some ideas, but the majority of the ideas are gone. Here, Jeff Wall has illustrated depression. So with depression, you tend to not care about your surroundings, and you lose your enthusiasm to do things or try new things and have thoughts and ideas that are positive. So Jeff Wall here is trying to illustrate that particular mental illness. And then, of course, another one. I'll quickly go over it since we only got a few minutes left. There's three figures. There's the man, the woman, and the figure off to the side. He's a butler. Here we have a literal linear division between the man and the woman. So they are no longer together. They are actually divorced. And if you read the facial expressions, you can figure out who ended up with the better deal. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's that one in a nutshell. So photography over the last few decades, it hasn't been around for too long, not nearly as long as drawing or painting or printmaking, which has been around from like forever. Printmaking itself is from the 9th century. Photography's come a long way. It was not originally accepted as an art medium. Now there's a lot of artists that prefer photography, and it's often taught at colleges and universities, and it's often a requirement for young artists to try their hand at it. Some artists are still using black and white, some are using color. Photography, obviously, a lot simpler to do today than it used to be. Now we can do it on our phones versus with a giant bulky camera. And pretty much almost anyone can take photographs now. Whether they're good or not is another story. That is a brief outline of the history of photography and how it's been used throughout the ages. Very, very brief outline, obviously. Tomorrow, we're going to look at moving images, which began with photographs. So we do have background knowledge necessary to move into the next step. Tomorrow, we're also going to continue practicing analysis, like I mentioned earlier, so come prepared to do that. But yeah, movies will start tomorrow, but we probably won't finish it because it's a bit of a longer one. But we are actually going to be watching films, so.
Have you ever gone to the Mark Film Festival?
I haven't gone. I have friends that have
It's
gone.
super cool. I'm gonna go.
I'll see you tomorrow, Melanie.
Bye, Professor. See you tomorrow.
I'll see all of you tomorrow. Have a good day, guys. I know I will. It's a shorter day. I'm a short day today. Yeah, I only have to go to PetSmart. Which is nice. Bye.
It shows that I informed my professor just go that it dropped me from like